Democrats' $3.5 trillion budget package instructs lawmakers to chart a pathway to citizenship for millions while investing in border security. This had been something that the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, immigrant rights community has been pushing for a long time, saying, look, let's be serious. There's no way we're getting immigration reform done in a bipartisan fashion. There's no way we're getting 60 votes for it. The last vehicle that only needs 50 votes out of town is reconciliation. Stick it in there. Joe Biden himself said after meeting with the CHC, let's put it in reconciliation. And now they're going to try. I think they'll be able to pull it off.
No, I think it's the cheap, lazy way to do it. And I think immigration has become this sort of political football that we punt back and forth between administration after administration, Congress after Congress, rather than dealing with the systemic issues and the root causes of migration, and also looking for a logical approach on how we deal with the more than 11 million immigrants here. But doing it this way makes no sense. I would be surprised if it passed bird rule muster in the Senate. Within the boundaries of reconciliation. But listen, this is one that frustrates me because I come from, the Republican Party where we were, all for build the wall, secure the border. I've been of the mind that we need to be able to talk to the other side on it. There's a reason that Barack Obama didn't solve it, Bill Clinton, George Bush didn't solve it, President Trump didn't solve the issue. If we cannot have a bipartisan discussion around it, we're never going to get something done long term. And I think it's to try to force it through this way on purely partisan grounds without any input from the other side is a recipe for disaster.
And on the bird rule question, so people know what we're talking about, reconciliation allows you to do budget impactful things through a 50-vote majority, but does not allow you to do broader policy whose primary objective is not budget related. And so the argument for why this could get through under reconciliation, and there is some precedent for it happening before, but not exactly like this, so we'll see, is that what you can do is you can change the amount of money that people have to pay. You can change the fines and the fee structure around applying for immigration status, and that will raise hundreds of millions of dollars over the years, if not significantly more. So they say, look, that's what's going on here. This is all we're doing. And in order to raise this money, you have to tweak who's eligible to go through it. It's starting out in a fairly sweeping way, which there'd be 10 million people who'd be eligible for this, which includes not just all of the people who are protected now under DACA. It includes the people who would have been protected under DACA during the Trump administration if he'd allowed new people to come into it. Also includes TPS people, which is temporary protective status. These are people who have left, say, Haiti amid a crisis and have a status that says it's too dangerous for you to go home right now. But once it's a little bit safer, then you have to go. It's saying, no, those people can stay here. It also says farm workers and frontline workers during the pandemic, which is an extremely broad definition. So that's how it could get to 10 million people. I think both parties deserve serious blame for where we are now. In 2005, 2006, when one of the first times since Reagan that there was going to be this big push to do comprehensive immigration reform, Rahm Emanuel, who was running the DCCC at the time, basically undermined it because he felt like he could bring out Hispanic voters to back Democrats in the 2006 midterms if they were angry enough at a kind of nativist wing of the Republican Party, and he really fueled as much as he could that nativist sentiment. Then that sentiment then metastasized, and in 2013 destroyed Boehner's effort to get, which your old Freedom Caucus buddies were instrumental in undermining. And so now we're at a structural place where I don't see how it is ever possible.
Well, a couple of things. For the background, thank you on the bird rule. My concern is this: the intent of reconciliation was never to advance sweeping policies that will have impacts on vast aspects of the American economy, American life, with a simple.
The intent of the filibuster was never to create the Senate we have today.
Fair. But the interesting thing with reconciliation is this gives broad jurisdiction to the Senate parliamentarian to determine if this meets muster to be able to go through the reconciliation process. I'm bullish that it won't. But another point, this is being presented by Democrats at a time when we have a massive crisis at the border. I'm not an immigration alarmist. I'm somebody who's always said we've got to work with the other side of the aisle, deal with the systemic issues that we have, the Northern Triangle countries, corruption, et cetera. But you have thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants at the border who are being released into the interior of the country with no legal status. By the way, many of them testing positive for COVID at a time when we have a public health crisis. So you have the Biden administration on the one hand literally encouraging migration into the interior of the U.S. without any sort of, process to vet these people to make sure they're not a national security threat, they're not a public health threat. All the while simultaneously saying, come on in, and we're going to give as many of you, legal status. I think you've got to deal with the problem first at the border, and then if they want to come around the table and talk about immigration status for the more than 10 million in the country, that's a different discussion. But deal with the problem, or we're going to be, having a conversation in 5 years about the next tranche of 10 million, the next tranche of 10 million.
Well, I think we'll be having that conversation either way. Because the idea that we're going to successfully deal with the problem of poverty and corruption in Central America, when we are the ones that kind of have fueled it so dramatically over the last several decades and last half century, is unlikely, and so there'll continue to be that push.
And I would disagree, though. I mean, the U.S. has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in financial aid and international aid to the Northern Triangle countries. We in the Trump administration actually worked closely with Mexico for the Remain in Mexico policy. This is an issue that Mexico wants to, by the way, deal with as much as the United States does. They don't want cartels tracking through their country to come into the interior of the U.S., but this administration chose to just stop enforcing laws right out, and it's incentivized people to come across the border at record rates. And I would say this. There is a discussion to be had about refugee status, asylee status, and making it so that you can come into the U.S. under the guise of wanting to become a citizen eventually, but through a legal process. But the free-for-all that we've seen for the last decade, it's not safe, it's not smart, it's not beneficial to the U.S. economy, and that's the problem you have to deal with first.
Right. Well, in Honduras, for instance, though, there's a coup in 2009, which the U.S. was completely fine with, if not, somewhat complicit in. The new coup government that came into power, representing elites aligned with drug traffickers, was then the recipient of all of this U.S. aid, which then, unsurprisingly, continued to destabilize the country.
But I would remind
under Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, and I would remind you, President Trump threatened to cut off aid to the Northern Triangle countries if they did not deal with corruption in their countries. I actually think we have honest brokers there who want to try to deal with it, but the issues are so deep and so systemic, and there is real corruption. With that, tomorrow on Rising, Team Rising is in the house. We're also joined by Brianna Joy Gray.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a video. We will see you tomorrow.